Welcome, everyone. Um, I am Ryan Cowley, and I'm going to speak to you on a topic called No More Stuttering Sorrow. Too bad I stutter. That's what I've been telling myself for the better part of 30 years. So many situations, so many circumstances I got myself out of without even trying, simply because I was just too afraid to try. I didn't have the wherewithal, I didn't have the courage to do very much. Socially, professionally, personally, there were so many situations I just let fall by the wayside simply because I was too afraid to try. And and more often than not, I was left feeling empty, feeling in hindsight, feeling what if. Well, I've been a person who stutters since I was 6 years old, and I didn't really find the stuttering community until I was 36, which was 2018. And all the frustration, much of the frustration rather, I put on myself, because it was just like it's one of those fortunate situations where I just said, like, what was me? I stutter. There's nothing I can do about it. But after so many years of telling myself that or trying to convince myself of that, I realized that um things just weren't working that way. And if I wanted to stand out in any way, I would have to face my fears. I would have to stop saying too bad I stutter and try. And if I stuttered, all all that fear uh of embarrassing myself or getting stuck on a word, or someone laughing at me, or mocking me, or cocking their head to the side when they look at me with confusion, or just negative interest. I had to stop letting those feelings overtake me. See, when I was a young kid, I uh I can't tell you how many times when I raised my hand in class and I got stuck on words, or if I was in line at the cafeteria and I wanted to ask for something and I couldn't get it out, how embarrassed I felt. It was like the tail between my legs, uh, figuratively. And um, and I just left feeling embarrassed. Convinced myself that I'll never speak again, at the risk of sounding dramatic. But um, but I don't know, just uh, but during those times of of when I was self conscious to speak, I decided to communicate in alternative ways. I decided to communicate like via writing. I was really into writing. I was really into drawing. I was really into reading, but uh, but writing especially. I convinced myself that this was an alternative way of communicating, so I kept up with it. Um, whether it was whether it's writing like journal entries, how I was feeling, poetry, like short stories. I just kind of fell into a groove that way. And growing up in Eastern Canada, like my brothers and my dad were all big hockey fans. Uh, so um, so I'd always sit in with them watching the games. But growing up, I always had like a notebook or a notepad on me with a pen or pencil. And sometimes I just like carried that around with me. Uh, and eventually I just started writing about what I was watching on TV, writing about hockey and all that. And uh, uh, um, as much I enjoyed um, as much I enjoyed writing, I loved just being in the game, being in the action. Uh, Certain broadcasters I grew up on. Um, I don't know how many of you are Canadian, but I grew up on Hockey Night Canada. I grew up listening to the late great Bob Cole call games as if it's some kind of art. Uh, and I just got into my own world. I just had this escape, and I absolutely loved it. I didn't really have any aspirations of being a broadcaster, uh, but nonetheless, it was just so much fun being a part of that. And you know, I forgot about how self conscious I was speaking. I forgot about my stutter. I forgot how embarrassed or small I felt if I tried to speak and I just couldn't. And the writing, it just continued. Uh, Mostly with the hockey, but I kept up, like uh, creating stories and creating characters to go with the stories, and almost kind of lived vicariously through these characters I was creating. And yeah, a lot of fun. But uh, there's something else though. It was just like I, but I didn't want to just go along without speaking at all. I figured, well, you know what? I have the resources to speak. I was able to speak, but as I said, socially and personally, and it was very tough getting my words across. I couldn't. I couldn't use the phone. I couldn't. Uh, More often than not, unfortunately, I couldn't say how I was feeling to certain groups. It was easier to talk to my family, but and some friends, but outside of that, I just couldn't get a word out. And for the longest time, um, I didn't think very highly of my stutter. I thought uh, 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 um, my stutter is a curse. My stutter is a burden. And I had speech therapy as a kid, and I just dreaded it. I tried to get as much as I could out of it, but it was just very difficult to just keep it going. Uh, but it almost seemed like the worse I stuttered, uh, the more I turned to my writing. And and I absolutely loved uh just kind of telling stories in my writing, whether that was actual stories or whether that was just writing about sports and explaining why this player is great, why this team's not so great. And and I was on and off with certain types of writing for many years. And then by the time I got uh excuse me, by the time I got to be like a young adult, I uh like as the 90s turned into thousands and the internet became bigger, I found many blog spaces to write on, and I would use many of them to just write about different things. One, I was writing about how I was feeling. The other, I was writing just poems and stuff. Another, I was writing about sports and my feelings on sports. So, what was going on at the time. So, not necessarily just hockey. And uh, it it was a very transitional time. I really enjoyed it, and and that's how I really started to come out of my shell. And, and of course, with the advent of email and ultimately text, it was nice to find an alternative way to communicate with the outside world too. So I just uh but all the writing I did, I just came back to hockey writing, and I eventually wrote about my favorite team, the NHL's Los Angeles Kings, who just got eliminated from the playoffs. So that's not very good. But uh, but by the time I started writing about them, they weren't a very good team. But but I was still a loyal fan. I still wanted to follow them and see them win. And even though I had nothing to do with the Kings' success, I in later years, I, I kind of felt that um, uh, 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 I kind of felt that perhaps I could live vicariously through them. Uh, um, you know, here's a team that struggled for so many years, ignored for so many years, and they were slowly but surely building themselves up to a playoff contender and a championship winner. And somewhere along the way, I just told myself I could be like them. You know, I was kind of down on the bottom for so many years, and I was ignored, and I put myself down there, and just with the shift in perspective, with change in attitude, I could ultimately build myself up. So, so by the time I started writing about them in 2006, they weren't a good team at all. But by the time 2010 came, and by this time I was writing for my own site about the Kings, they had become a playoff team again. And then in 2012, they won the Stanley Cup for the first time ever. Which, if you don't know, it's hockey's championship, and it was a surreal feeling, and to me, it was just like Well, man, I kind of had my own escalation and during that time too, and it was very special. But um, but during that time, it was just like there was more I just could have um, uh, 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 um, uh, uh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt myself. There's a lot going on with me right now, so I'm just so if I'm just so if I'm stopping, just please understand. It was just like uh but as wonderful as that escalation was, all I could think about was just all the times when uh people heard me stutter and they just thought that, you know, I lacked the confidence or I lacked intelligence. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened and how heartbreaking that was every time that's happened. And remember around 2016, I quit my day job, which I was treated well at, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I left it for a writing job at a marketing company. I loved writing all my life, but at this juncture, um, yeah, at that juncture, I never had a full time writing job. I never got paid full time for writing. I was the job was a disaster. The writing job. I was let go after a month. For whatever reason, I was boxed out right away by the other employees, and it was just really lonely feeling. And as you can imagine, I hated it. But uh, so in the aftermath of losing that job, there was a lot of hard feelings for me. There was a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness. I went into deep depression, and for the 2 3 weeks following that job loss, I was content just to you know kind of pack it all in a sense. Just feeling sorry for myself. Just just laying in bed or lying on my couch and just letting the days go by. And I remember after 2 3 weeks, of just being mentally and physically exhausted, I just told myself, "Okay, you know what, Ryan, you've got to do something to get yourself going again. You've got to do something to give yourself purpose again." And and I remember thinking about what I could do uh to do that. Because as we all know, any project, uh anything we do, uh, 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 um the hardest part is actually getting started. And I try to tell myself, I tried to tell myself, okay, come on, full steam ahead. Once you do it, you'll be off to the races. But just how I was feeling and how I was feeling short term, but how I was feeling for the better part of the last 30 years, I just needed to, you know, uh, needed to convince myself that the next thing I did was worth doing. And I just remember uh, just thinking about certain possible projects I could do. And I remember thinking that the LA Kings, were about to enter their 50th season. It's a golden anniversary. And I thought about in haste at first. I was like, well, maybe I could interview 50 former Kings, you know, half joking. And at first I'm like, oh yeah, I could, yeah, that'll happen. But I kept coming back to that and kind of thinking, well, hey, who knows? Maybe I could do this. Uh, because growing up, especially in the '90s, where we just had the landlines, no cell phone, no text or email, um, as much. Uh, I just always had the most difficult time speaking on the phone. Still do. But I could barely get a word out. I could barely get a sound out. And especially when I'm calling my friends or people I liked or calling a manager at a job, I always had to ask for someone because obviously with cell phones, you don't really have to these days. But back then, there's no guarantee who'd answer the phone. So that was just one of the many issues I had on the phone. So fast forward to 2016, and these, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I could interview 50 former LA Kings players to coincide with the 50th anniversary. And I thought, well, geez, it's the phone. I really don't think I could face this. But then I said to myself, well, hey, the whole too bad I stutter thing. Don't say too bad I stutter. Actually try for the first time in your life uh, with the situation that involves speaking. Actually try, and and that was a big thing for me. And so I actually tried, and yeah, it was like, um, and slowly but surely, I created ways to adapt to the phone interviews. I couldn't speak live, uh, but I knew I could, just kind of push through in different ways. So what I did was I downloaded an auto recording app on my laptop and uh, and recorded the questions into that. Because when I know no one is on the other end listening, I could speak fine. And then the other idea took an idea from the King's Speech, the Colin Firth movie. And there's a point in the movie where Colin Firth, King George, he he's reading a passage from a book uh, with classical music on headphones, and it's significant that that's the first time in the movie where he doesn't stutter. So I remember that, and I combined the two. Then I wrote up my email template for all my interview subjects, who I am, what I'm looking for, and the forewarning about my speech, asking for the patient understanding, which I got from all of them, so that wasn't a problem. And then I just went ahead and slowly but surely reached out to different former Kings players, and I found 50 of them, and I interviewed 50 of them. Um, uh, and when all was said and done, it was just one of those things where, you know, I could stop, sit down, and really reflect on, well, for me at least, a major accomplishment. I interviewed all these people. This was a major project. This was something I wouldn't have done 5 years before, 10 years before, 20 years before, and here I was having just done it, and I'm like, hey, if I can do this, there's there really isn't any telling about what else I can do. and it was just a fantastic feeling. And um, I eventually found another job, a job I was at for the next 7 years, and a job, who really understood me in spite of my stutter, and who allowed me different ways to communicate. Uh, and that was really probably the first job I shouldn't say the first job, but one of the first jobs I've had where I was able to really be myself. Where people knew that I stuttered, but a lot of people looked well beyond my stutter. And so with that, the 1515 project out of the way, I realized that I wanted to meet other people from the stuttering community. Now, granted, I mean, at this juncture, I've been a stutterer for 30 years, and I didn't really know anyone else who stuttered. The only other people I knew who stuttered were, Winston Churchill or Marilyn Monroe or James Earl Jones, and great company to be in. But two of them were long dead. But even James Earl Jones is like he's a celebrity. The chance of meeting him were slim to none. So I would love to meet someone, who's who doesn't live far from me, or even if it's someone on the other side of the world, it would be nice to, talk to someone, connect with someone who stutters. And I found a podcast in 2017 called Stuttering is Cool. Uh, um, which was hosted by uh, which was hosted by Daniel Rossi, who who was another person who stutters, no, who was very familiar in the stutter community. And we got to talking, and we hit it off. And he told me about the Canadian Stuttering Association and how they were having a conference where I live in Toronto. And I think they were having a conference in the next few weeks, and I decided to go. And it was a real game changer. I before that day, I never been. Uh, I'd never known one person, much less an auditorium full of people who stutter. So people from all different age groups, all different walks of life, cultures, backgrounds, you name it. Just so many different people who stuttered, and so many different stories. And it changed a lot of things for me. And it was one of those things where, hey, I mean, outside of my own family, I never really felt part of a family or a group, and that and this kind of changed that. And it was a surreal feeling almost. Uh, and some people stutter I connected with, some I didn't, but uh, it was just wonderful being in this new world, so to speak. And um, and after that day, I was just inspired to do more. You know, I casually told a few people about my story, as I call it, as a sports writer who stutters, and one of the CSA organizers even suggested, "Hey, I like your story. You should apply for a workshop at the next year's event, 2019." So I did, and October 2019, at that conference, it was the first time I really um, spoke at an event, and I absolutely loved it. I did a lot of drama and stand-up comedy, so I was really comfortable being on stage, and I absolutely love sharing my story. Um, and it was just a great feeling. Now, unfortunately, COVID happened a few months later, so the live speeches were put on hiatus. But I continued to share my story online. Uh, I even took the downtime to write my first book, All the Right Words: My Journey as a Sports Writer Who Stutters. Then the second book I wrote um, was those Kings interviews I told you about, and then I wrote a book of poetry, and now I just started writing a children's book. So uh, yeah, it's a lot of good things that have happened since then, and I've also been speaking to uh, I mean at conferences, but um, this is my third StutterFest, by the way. So to the organizers, Tom, Trisha, and all them, thank you. But uh, I'm I've also speaking to SLP and communication disorder programs across Canada and the United States. I made 83 speeches last year, and so far uh, um, I lost count. I've done 31, 32 speeches so far this year. So yeah, um, it's been a wonderful time, and the thing is, um, I'm very happy to look back on this and thinking, you know, this wasn't anything. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too humble, but this wasn't anything like fantastical. Um, I don't have any kind of special degree. I don't have any sort of like a like the highest IQ or anything. Uh, I really don't think there's anything special about me at all. But um, it was just an issue where I just decided to actually try, and you can't have the courage to do something unless you actually try, and you can't inspire yourself. You can't attempt to inspire others if you don't try, and it's as simple as that. It's more simple as an idea, of course, but I've just I've been through a lot in terms of um, I've just been through a lot i- in terms of finding myself, finding identity, and um, there was like um, it, 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 it's yeah. Excuse me. I'm just trying to find the right words here, but all I want to do was be appreciated. All I wanted to do was to be. Uh, all I want to do was be respected, and um, you know, and I just want to try something, and I want to try something big. I mean, I've had depression for I was diagnosed like 20 years ago, but I've had it longer than that. And I largely because of my stutter, I thought about just ending it all many times. And um and it, to me it was just like I don't want people at my funeral thinking, oh man, man, this it was a total waste. What if almost? Um, Instead, I want rather people say, "Hey, uh, uh, um, he left in in i- i- impact or something like that, and that'll be good enough for me." But you know what? I've done a lot so far in terms of speaking, in terms of writing, but I am not done. And and yeah, um, this is my journey, and I wouldn't trade it for a for a a a a a sorry, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So so thank you all.